Hey everybody, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with our weekly lecture series. I want to thank our sponsor, Mr. Marshall, for sponsoring this lecture on topic chose, which is Daniil Dubov. He's one of the top 50 players in the world over the last, about 7 years. And his peak was 24th in the world. He has a very strange Wikipedia page. It goes year by year, and some of the years it has like one sentence. It talks about when he played in the European Youth Championships a long time ago, and was winning under 12, under 10, long time ago. He's currently 28 years old. Birthday's the day before my mom's, and also the day before Susan Polgar's, although he's a lot younger. Anyway, he's from Soviet Russia, and he's won many tournaments. Probably the most impressive was the 2018 World Rapid Championship in St. Petersburg. He was World Rapid Champion. Dubov is known for a very aggressive style, and as our sponsor has pointed out, reminds a little bit of Bent Larsen, who wasn't the top player in the world, but was very good at beating grandmasters in the second tier who were maybe like 2450 to 2650 rated. Larsen and Dubov are good at beating those kinds of people because their styles are very creative. And Larsen had a better career, but Dubov's career isn't over. Larsen played candidates matches and was board one for rest of the world versus USSR, ahead of Bobby Fischer for some reason. And they're both very creative, Larsen and Dubov, and have good results against people who aren't in the top 10 in the world. Although Dubov and Larsen have both beaten players top 10 in the world also. Anyway, you can look year by year at Dubov's successes. Wikipedia article gets bigger recently since he's been 2,700 FIDE and beaten Magnus, Carlsen, and so forth. It says he learned chess at the age of 6. And one thing I learned this lecture, other than looking at the games, was his dad, who passed away a few years ago, was an international arbiter of chess and a mathematician. Mathematician part I don't care about, but he was an international chess arbiter. Okay, that's Daniil Dubov. He's a top player. Recently, he's been involved in some controversy, which is always good for the chess world. As many people know, Kramnik likes to say that everybody's cheating, and then he denies, he says they're cheating. Anyway, Dubov got on the bandwagon for one person. Dubov didn't like something related to Naroditsky and said something to him. So even though Naroditsky's the last guy to cheat, there's a lot of controversy in chess, and sometimes people get on the wrong bandwagon. So hopefully he'll say something about that later, like, oh no, Naroditsky didn't cheat. Just kidding. That would be. Okay, let's go look at the games. Unlike most of my other lectures, the sponsor chose the games, and you made some good choices. And considering his name's Marshall, I'm surprised you didn't pick any Marshall gambits. Although one of the games was sort of like a Marshall gambit. It was like a fake Marshall. Okay, so the first game, and these games were all played in 2019 and 20. They're all pretty recent. Was played against Jan Nepomniachtchi in the Russian Championship of 2020. A few years ago, and Dubov has the white pieces. Okay, and they played a Grunfeld. Not sure which player is more of a fighting player, because they both are. And they both have deep theoretical knowledge, and Dubov has a lot of interesting sidelines that he plays, which get him to unusual positions that he knows better than his opponent. And he didn't disappoint this game. They played one of the main lines, And then in this position, black played, or white, I should say, Dubov played an uncommon move. Played the move bishop b5 check, which I've played once. I used to play bishop b5 check a long time ago, before Dubov was born. Well, maybe he was born. Close. Okay, this is typically white plays the old line, which is bishop c4 and knight e2, or the modern way, which is knight f3 and bishop e3 and queen d2. So bishop b5 check is probably like the third or fourth most common way for white to play. C6 is one move. Black can also play bishop d7 or knight d7. And Dubov played bishop a4. So white is, by provoking the move c6, makes it tough for black to play c5 and attack the center pawn. So Jan, who has the black pieces, isn't averse to, wild and crazy chess. So he plays b5, unpinning his c pawn. Now he can play c5 later if he likes. Bishop b3 and a5, gaining more space on the queen side. Knight f3, castles. Now the players are just playing normal moves. a4, bishop c2, obviously, and c5. So we have a Grunfeld where black's played b5 and a4, which is very strange. And white's done this bishop, like he's playing a Ruy Lopez. Bishop b5, bishop a4, bishop e3, bishop c2. And white has the big center, which we want in the Grunfeld. Okay, rook b1, getting the rook off of the diagonal with the bishop, and unusually attacking the b5 pawn. Usually in the Grunfeld, black's pawn isn't on b5. Sort of a gain of a tempo. Jan ignores the capture, thinking, well, I'll play bishop a6 and skewer the rooks if he plays rook takes b5. d5, again, once white moves the rook away from a1, d5 is more palatable. You're not going to be in trouble of losing your rook in the corner. Knight e5, traded. Bishop h6, attacking the rook. And bishop a6, sacrificing the exchange. Not a fan of that move. I guess if I was black, I'd probably just play rook e8. Not sure why he played bishop a6. Not even a move that would be on my radar. Bishop takes f8. King takes f8. And black has counterplay by controlling all the dark squares with the dark squared bishop, attacking the c3 pawn. And if he gets to win the c3 pawn, he'll have 3-1 on the queen side here. Majority trying to get a pass pawn or two. So Dubov says, you can have my f pawn or c pawn. I'm going to checkmate you. And Jan said, no talking. Bishop takes c3. Rook f3, getting the rook into the attack. Queen a5 and e5. So black wins on the queen side, white wins on the king side. And Bobby Fischer said it's better to win on the king side because that's where the king is. So white's going to play for checkmate, and black's going to try to get some pawn promotions on the queen side. King g8, defending his h-pawn, getting his king back to where it belongs. King h1, rook d8, and e6. e6, very creative, unusual move because Nepomniachtchi just pinned the d-pawn. So it looks like the very specific reason to play rook d8 is to pin the pawn and make e6 not make any sense. And then Dubov plays e6. Let's see what happened. Took. And then bishop takes g6, sacrificing a piece, trying to get at black's king. And a lot of people, like me, when they are at exchange ahead, they play for no complications and simplicity and win some endgame up material. And ever since Dubov won the exchange, he sacrificed his c-pawn, sacrificed his e-pawn, and sacrificed his bishop. Because he doesn't stand on ceremony. He plays the move that he thinks best beats best meets the requirements of the position. It's hard for me to say meets because I'm a vegan. Okay, so thank you for the bishop. Now black is a head material, and queen c2 is a fork. It attacks the bishop and also attacks the pawn on g6 with check. You can see white's queen and rook are pretty menacing since, black's pieces over here aren't necessarily defending the king. Bishop g7, rook g3. White wants to play queen takes g6. g5. Queen g6 anyway. Queen d2. And he takes, threatening queen takes g7 checkmate. Jan plays queen c3 and defends his bishop. Queen takes e6 check. Now white's going to be up material because white's checking and threatening the bishop on a6. Plays rook e1, doesn't want to take the bishop, wants to play queen takes e7 check. Black doesn't have time to save his bishop because queen e7's winning. Queen takes rook. There's not really a good defense here. If black plays something like rook e8, then I can play d6. And the truth hurts. And if you play bishop f6 to defend e7, then rook g8 is mate, and queen g8 is mate. So, not easy to defend e7. So he plays queen takes e1, and he has two bishops for a queen and his big queenside pawn majority, but his king is still a bit exposed. Queen h4, he doesn't want to retreat his rook. He's looking at bishop takes rook and then queen h8 check, attacking the rook on d8. 6, queen h7, threatening rook g8 mate. King e8. If you take, not only does white have a mating attack against black's king, white's also looking to get another queen. Not easy to stop. So he plays king e8, running away. Check. Queen a8. Just surrounding the king, defending the pawn on d5. Again, he doesn't mind bishop takes rook because he takes back and has all these passed pawns on the king side. Black gets a passed pawn. White has passed pawns. Everybody has passed pawns. Checks a few times and picks up the b pawn. And after losing his a pawn, bishop's attacked. He moves his bishop away to safety, loses his c pawn. Plays rook d6 or bishop b5. He doesn't really have any chance to promote his pawn. Queen b4 stops the pawn from moving, and white has all these juicy passed pawns over here and over here, and Jan resigned. So a brilliant game from Dubov, typical kind of Dubov game, very creative, material imbalance going both ways, and usually if you play that kind of style, you may be lower rated players and find that higher rated players are tougher. However, in this instance, Jan was the higher rated player and world championship candidate, and still Dubov was able to win very convincingly. The next game, Dubov has black. This is a game against Jonas Bjerre. I think he's Danish, I think. Actually, another lecture looked at a game that Bjerre played, and he barely lost. Barely. Okay, this is in the European Team Championships in 2019. Dubov has black. And even though Dubov will play double king pawn with black, it makes it kind of interesting. A lot of double king pawn players keep it solid and close to the vest and equalize and so forth. But not Dubov. Dubov plays very aggressively with black and double king pawn. So Rui Lopez, as I said, sponsors Mr. Marshall. So black played very Marshall-esque kind of way. The actual Marshall gambit would go c3, d5. White's trying to avoid that with a4, but trying is the first step to failure. Supposedly, black can't play the Marshall Gambit against a4. Why white plays a4. Stop d5, and Dubov plays it anyway. Dubov doesn't say, well, that guy 50 years ago said this line's not good. I'll just take his word for it. Dubov looks at aggressive lines at home, probably with engines and coaches, and tries to find discarded lines and find new takes, new ideas, and plays them over the board where his opponent doesn't have the luxury of having coaches and computers to help him. So advantage Dubov, as long as the opening's not too bad. ED, knight a5, very unusual move. Dubov sacrificing all his center pawns, messing up white's pawn structure. So white's up 2 pawns, but black has the lead in development, and black has a better pawn structure. And it's a very unusual position, which probably Dubov looked at home, and his opponent probably never saw such a position before. Knight c6. White's still up 2 pawns. Well, if you see this pawn structure with a pawn here and a pawn here, very confusing. Bishop c5. White has no development at all. All of white's pieces are on the first rank. d3, try to get his bishop out. And Dubov sacrifices his bishop on f2. Dubov likes to sacrifice. And typically, you sacrifice too much against grandmasters. That doesn't work out. But for Dubov, it works out a lot. King takes. Queen d4 check. Bishop e3. Knight g4 check. King f3. And white is ahead a piece and a pawn. Takes. Rook takes. Rook e8. And black says, I have enough compensation because your pieces in the corner aren't helping defend your king. Black is threatening the rook on e3. So rook e2. Check. King has to go to the g file. g5 threatening queen f4 check and queen h4 checkmate. Not that way. This way. White plays rook f2 and stops all that nonsense. Queen d6 check. King h3. The king's trying to get to safety. Queen h6 check. And in this position, white played king g4. If white plays king g3, then we check and play checkmate. So he plays king g4. In this position, he resigned. Again, king f3 is getting mated, as we indicated already. And white plays king f5. I would have to bet that black has more than one winning move here. But he didn't play it, so we don't see. If I was black, I would consider moves like f6, threatening rook e5 checkmate. I would consider rook e6 with the idea of doubling rooks on the e-file, and the white king just can't survive on f5. So it would have been nicer if we played on. Probably what Dubov would have done, now that I'm seeing it, is taken the rook with check. That certainly wins, because now black is ahead material. But it's possible, if I turn the engine on, queen takes rook is not the best move, and black has some forced mate. Which I don't see. But I'm guessing for a human, once you see queen takes rook check, you can safely resign with white. White didn't develop their queen side at all, and white developed his king. White had good king development, which isn't necessarily what you want in chess. Typically, grandmasters aren't losing with white in 20 moves by getting checkmated, but that's the power of Dubov, is he plays unusual lines that he studied at home that are very tricky and also better than his opponent, so he has lots of advantages. In fact, when this game was played, Dubov was 26.99, So it must have put Dubov over 2,700. Okay, now Dubov has white again. Now you might think, okay, Dubov beat these guys. These guys are no good. Show me a world champion he beat. Okay, calm down in the back. Here's a game Dubov won against Magnus Carlsen in the Airthings Masters Knockout Rapid in 2020. Magnus is pretty good, and Dubov has beaten Magnus because Dubov's style of play is not conducive to Magnus. Magnus likes to be slightly better, then clearly better, then winning, and strategically outplay his opponents, and have more time on the clock, and so forth. And typically, Magnus gets it done. And some players play sort of offbeat, unusual, complicated opening, tactical chess. That throws Magnus off a little bit. And Dubov is just such a player. Okay, so d4. And they didn't want to play the Nimzo Indian because they wanted to wait for my course to come out, which it came out today. So they were waiting. Thanks, guys, for waiting for my course. Instead, knight f3, g3, transposing into a Catalan. This should be 4 check. Takes. Sort of unusual line. White has the 2 bishops for the sacrificed pawn. White has a lead in development. We've seen these kinds of ideas in other Dubov games as well. e5, a4, attacking the b5 pawn. It's actually one of my rules. When your opponent plays b5, you should play a4. It's good that Dubov knows my rules. c6, trying to keep his pawn structure intact. Plays b4. It's very difficult in the long run to defend the d5 pawn. I can play rook c1, queen c2, knight e5, and you're not going to hang on to your c4 pawn. So he plays c6. Magnus wants to be a pawn ahead. Queen c2. And Dubov plays h4 because he's Dubov. The way they play chess now, I'm never surprised when somebody plays h4. If it was the 1970s, 80s, or 90s, I'd be like, h4? What kind of move is that? Now I'm like, why didn't they play h4 yet? So remember, when your chess coach says play in the center and don't give material away, you should instead give material away and play a4 and h4. Only then can you beat the world champion. Knight bd7, h5, putting in an h6, stopping white from playing h6. Knight e5, Dubov plays aggressively. Now, knight e5 unleashes the latent potential of the bishop on g2. Now, white is threatening to capture the pawn on b5 because the c6 pawn is pinned. Magnus blocks the pin with knight d5. Rook h4. Dubov has no intention of castling, wants to get his rook to g4 and start attacking Magnus's king if Magnus ever puts his king anywhere. Knight f6, stopping rook g4. King f1, getting the king to safety. King g1. Knight b4, attacking the queen. Queen moves away. Magnus is really afraid to castle either way because his king looks exposed no matter where it is. White's played a4. Magnus has pushed all of his queenside pawns. White's played h4, h5, rook h4. White's queen and bishop make a battery here, which makes a sacrifice likely if black castles kingside. So it's a rapid game, and Magnus has to rapidly figure out where his king should go. Rook d8, putting pressure on the center. Takes. Bishop takes b4, takes. And rook a7, pinning the bishop to the queen. So after a series of trades, white has tremendous pressure here. Knight d5, blocking the bishop again. Rook g4. We wanted to play rook g4. Now we're able to play it. Rook g8, obviously not a move you want to play. But if you castle, you'll be very unhappy when Dubov plays queen takes h6. Unless you want Dubov to win, then you'll be very happy. And you can't allow rook takes g7. So Magnus doesn't have a lot of choice here. Rook g8 is not a move he wants to play, but you got to play what you got to play. Queen c2. Dubov wants to play queen h7. c3. Magnus says, before you checkmate me, let me promote a pawn on the queen side. And Dubov says, I'll take that pawn. No pawns for you. Rook c8. Knight d3, trying to set up a blockade. Knight f6, attacking the rook. Bishop takes b7, attacking black's rook. Queen takes. And knight c5. So even though the rook is attacked, Dubov has no interest in defending it. He wants to counterattack against black's pieces. Now in this position, Magnus played rook takes c5, which is what I would have played. And the other option is to move the queen away. And then when white saves his rook, c-pawn's hard to defend. So Magnus decides this wins a piece. And Magnus wins a piece. Unfortunately, Magnus's king is on g8 and his rook is on e8, I should say. His rook is on g8. Magnus could reverse that and put his king on g8 and his rook on e8. Then he'd just be a piece up. c6, getting his pass pawn aggressively placed. And the idea is, if you don't take it, that's good. I'm pushing my pawn to promote. If you do take it, I can play rook c3 attacking the queen, and rook c8 check, and rook takes g8. So c6 is a very nice move from Dubov. Magnus does take. If the queen goes elsewhere, we still could play rook check and rook takes rook in most positions. Takes. Magnus says, if you take my rook, I'm going to checkmate you. I wonder if Magnus actually said that. Okay, well, he might have, because Dubov didn't get checkmated. e3, stopping all of Magnus's threats. Now, white is again threatening rook c8 check, rook takes rook, winning the game. And Dubov has what people call long-term pressure. Sacrifices material, and it's not like you either win or you lose. Even if you don't win, he still has pressure and makes it difficult for his opponent. What would you play here if you were black, especially if you were in time trouble? I was thinking like king d7 stops the rook from coming in, but that also allows queen d1 check, as in Christensen Karpov, and attacks the knight on g4. That doesn't quite work. Magnus played king e7, same idea. Doesn't allow queen d1 check. Rook c6. Dubov wants Magnus to put his queen on the second rank so he can fork. Magnus says, I'm not doing that. Queen c5. If the king goes back, we have rook c8. The king went to f6. Rook d6, attacking the queen and threatening queen d4 check, the fork. Queen d4 check with a fork. King g5. Magnus is still up a piece. f3. Always play f3. Now, white's threatening queen takes g4 winning or queen f4 check winning. Magnus plays f5, giving his king some shelter. Takes. Now Magnus is only up a pawn, but Magnus's king is still running around. Rook c8. Queen f4. And queen takes f5, checkmate, which obviously Magnus missed when he played rook to c8. Although I must say, takes f5 looks pretty good too. So Magnus must have been in terrible time trouble, couldn't defend against all the threats, and eventually got mated in one move with basically his king running around the whole game. Whereas Dubov, who also didn't castle, his king was relatively safe on g1. So pretty good square for Dubov's king. Not very good for Carlsen's king. Now, if you analyze that game with an engine, it's probably going to say that Magnus had a good position. But engines don't play chess. That's what humans do. And if you put pressure on your opponent, a lot of times they fail. And Dubov always puts pressure on his opponent. So when it's correct to do so and he's winning, he wins easily. When it's not correct to do so and an engine could play perfect every move and win, they don't, the people don't, and they lose anyway. Very similar to the way Morphy plays chess. Morphy put pressure on his opponents, made a lot of threats. The engine said, oh, I can stop those threats, but his opponents couldn't. Even though the opponent's Magnus Carlsen. Okay, last but not least, and this game is very interesting. I'm glad the sponsor chose it. And the sponsor doesn't know this because this happened after the sponsor picked the game. This opening was played again about 10 days ago in the U.S. Women's Championship in the game Tatev Abrahamian versus Carissa Yip. And Tatev forgot her prep, and she was lost pretty quickly with white. And the idea from Tatev's prep is from this Dubov game. So she stole the prep, she forgot the prep, Dubov won with his prep, and Tatev wasn't so lucky. Okay, and they played this line in the Joko piano. And in this position, grandmasters almost always play d3. If this was the 1800s or early 1900s, then white would play d4, which is pretty rare nowadays. That's just Dubov's style. And in this position, Dubov invented the delayed Evans gambit by playing b4, confusing the audience being his opponent. This is also the game played a few days ago with Tatev Abrahamian white and Carissa Yip as black. Bishop b6, e5, knight e4. Think Carissa played d5, and in this position, white made a mistake. I think white's supposed to play queen e2 check, and she took on g7 right away, and black ended up winning the game that was played a few days ago. But I think d5 was suggested as an improvement after this game, and there was some analysis. But Karjakin didn't play d5, he played knight e4. So now the game gone its own way, although it's the first game in the line. Bishop d5, the knight is semi-trapped. Knight takes c3. Okay, and as usual, Dubov is sacrificing all of his pawns to get an initiative. Bishop g5, it's looking bad for black's queen. Knight e7, castles. Most of black's pieces are on the first rank. One on the second rank is pinned. Bishop can never get out from c8. The rook can never get out from a8. And all white had to do was sacrifice a couple of pawns, and probably white's going to win this pawn back. So, not a big deal. h6, castles, rook e1. This makes it difficult for black to play d6 because we take and we have pressure on e7. So rook e1 makes d6 very hard to play. If you don't play d6, you can't legally move your b pawn. That means these pieces are no good. And that's the way Dubov played. He tries to have more active pieces than you, and if it costs him a pawn or an exchange or a piece, that happens. So in this case, even more like Morphy than Larsen, playing crazy double king pawn, sacrificing material, getting a big lead in development. Opponent doesn't have any way out. And the difference is people claim Morphy's opponents weren't very good, but you don't claim that Nepo and Magnus and Karjakin aren't good. Those are the people who play for the world championship and are the world champion and tie world championship matches and so forth. Okay, so he played queen e8, unpinning his knight on e7. Bishop drops back to b3. 5. And now bishop f6. I've seen this kind of move in Sicilians, not too often in double king pawn. Obvious idea is if you take and I take, now you can really see why the rook's on e1. And if you don't take, I'm going to try to get my queen to the g file. And I got 4 squares to do it. And then I can play queen g7 mate. Okay, so black played a4, attacking the bishop. Dubov said, I like my bishop. Knight g6. And queen d3. And this is a very basic tactic you see a lot. The bishop is pitting the f pawn. White's threatening queen takes g6. Game's over. d5. Now if you play queen g6, I can take your queen. So he takes en passant. The rook is attacking the queen. Bishop e6. And the brilliant move of the day, although we've seen brilliant moves in every game. Let's see. John, you like brilliant moves. John's in the live audience. Do you see what move White played here?
There are so many good moves.
There's so many tactics. That's right.
Every piece is tactics to look at there.
That's right. Yeah, it's tough playing Dubov. There's a lot of tactics to look at, and he's pretty good at tactics. You could take the bishop either way.
Take the queen with the knight just to be exciting. I mean, that looks like the most exciting.
Play d7.
That looks exciting.
On c3.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in this position, strangely enough, black is up 1 pawn. It's not like Dubov sacrificed the house. He didn't sacrifice anything yet, basically. Okay, John, as usual, is correct. Queen takes g6. That's why he pays the big bucks. He looks at moves other players wouldn't look at. Now, White is threatening queen takes g7 mate with advantage. So black must take the queen. Now we play rook takes e6, threatening everything. Every move is a threat. It's not clear what's best. Rook takes queen check, rook e7 discovered check, etc. For example, if you take this bishop, I double check, and then I take your rook, and White's up a rook and a piece. Like out of nowhere. Like black's pieces all disappeared. Okay, so Karjakin's pretty good. He's been called the Minister of Defense. Well, time to defend. And he played queen f7. That stops all the discovered checks. Bishop takes c3. He's like, yeah, I'll make a discovered attack later. So here, White has a piece for a queen, but White has this persistent attack that's always happening on these diagonals. The a2, g8, and a1, h8 diagonals. Those bishops are pretty strong. If somebody says, excuse me, isn't Dubov down a queen? My answer would be, of course, but he has the 2 bishops. 2 bishops, what else? King h8, getting off of the diagonal with the rook and queen and bishop. Rook e4, the rook defends the bishop. Queen's attacked. If you let White take the queen, White's up a piece, so the queen must move. Queen f5. Rook e7, threatening. Rook takes g7, and bishop takes g7 check, both which win. Rook g8, defending g7. Takes. Rook has to take. And takes on c7. White's trying to win on both sides of the board. So now, strangely enough, confusing the audience, which is mainly Karjakin, this material is considered equal. White has a rook, knight, and pawn for a queen. Black has doubled pawns. White has a passed pawn on the 7th rank. White has a big attack on g7. White would like to play rook d1, rook d8 at some point. White wants to play knight e5 and continue attacking. And basically material's equal. So white has all the advantages and didn't really have to sacrifice much. Queen c2, threatening the bishop. He defends his c7 pawn. It's a monster pawn. Bishop f2. h3 getting luffed. Now the rook comes into the game. And the c7 pawn is just too strong. White's attacking on the king side and the queen side. And finally, white is ahead material after all of the machinations. But it's not easy to win, because this pawn, if it's captured, would give black some dangerous queenside pawns. So black tries to capture it. Fortunately, black's king is still in a bit of trouble. And now we're threatening rook e5 check. The truth hurts. And in this position, black realized there's no defense to rook e5 check, so he resigned. For example, if you take on a2, check, only legal move, checkmate, with advantage. So you can't take on a2, your king's in a mating net, so black resigned. So that was one of the most brilliant games of the year, when he played queen takes g6, sacrificed, had long-term compensation. And that's what I like about Dubov's games. He's not sacking a rook and then he mates you in 3 moves. And you're like, oh, that was good. He sacrifices material. A few moves later, he sacrifices more material. And we're like, is that good? And then 5 moves later, we're like, oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like the way that turned out. So 4 brilliant games from Dubov, one of the top players in the world. He never made it to the top 10, but he's only in his 20s, so he still has a chance to. Again, I want to thank our sponsor, Mr. Marshall. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, then please contact my wife at the email address in your video, and you can sponsor a lecture on your topic. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment. It helps the channel out a lot. Also, my Chessable course on the Nimzo Indian just came out. Don't forget to buy my course and buy one for a friend for the holidays. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. Bye.